Andrea's not with us today. She has, we don't know what the problem is, but it's either a tooth or an infected gland or something in this region here that's giving her a fit. So she'll probably be going to Doc in the Box this afternoon. Maybe my lymph nodes swelling, but she's not in very good condition this morning. So anybody else that needs to be added to the okay. Left them at home. Okay. Anyone else? Brother Jeremy, lead us in a prayer, please.
Yes, sir. We pray, Father, thank you for this morning, for the opportunity to come together and to study your word. We pray for all those who were just mentioned as being sick, especially for Sister Rosie, as she's in the hospital. Father, be with us as we go into our time of worship later today. Help us to remain focused where we need to, and help us to always remember to take every opportunity to spread the gospel. In Christ's name, amen.
When I looked at my schedule to see my topic for the day, it was Abraham and Sarah, and then it had a little note out there beside it that was said, faithful choices have big effect. And I got to thinking about it. Abraham and Sarah, faithful choices, big effects. Didn't they also make some unfaithful choices that had big effects? So that's sort of the area that we're going to go look at today. We're going to look at Abraham and Sarah. And I know why we want to focus on the faithful choice, the good choice, but we just need to look at them as a whole. And I want to start with Abraham, but I want to start in Romans, the book of Romans, chapter 4 and verse 3. Romans 4 and verse 3 says, "For what saith the Scripture? Abraham believed God, and it was counted unto him for righteousness." That also is in book of Genesis, chapter 15 and verse 6. But what does it mean that his belief counted for righteousness? Well, let's go at it this way. What does the word righteous mean, or righteousness mean?
To do right by God.
If we look at the modern encyclopedia or dictionary and try to define righteous, you can go in and find words that then you have to go look those words up. But very simply, the word righteous just means to be right. Now, depending on your application, it could go with God. But if I am doing right things for my wife, isn't that being righteous and rightful to her? So, but here the implication is that he is doing it for God. Also, I know that the reference that I'm going to use is not in our Bible. We don't use this in any shape, form, or fashion. But in the book of Ecclesiasticus, which is an apocryphal book, they use the term that Abraham kept the law. So if you look at Abraham keeping the law as being what's referred to here as righteous, I think we would be on the right track. Now, does him being righteous, or with his belief in God being counted as righteousness, does that make Abraham a perfect person? It does not. If you go back to Genesis and we get into chapter 12, we're going to be skipping around quite a bit today, but in Genesis chapter 12, when we look at verses 10 through 13, there was a famine in the land, and he had gone into Egypt, and what did he tell his wife, his half-sister, to do? Tell a lie. Well, it really wasn't a lie, was it? In the technical sense, but it was very misleading. So I've said this before, when I was growing up, I was always taught that half a lie, which this was, no, let me rephrase that. Half a truth, which this was a whole lie, because he had misled. Now, he didn't learn his lesson from this, because in chapter 20 he did it again. But my question is, by God's standard, how can he be considered a righteous man if he is willing to have his wife placed in a position of risk? It would be risking her virtue.
Well, the context in Romans 4, he's talking about in Romans 3, the fact that the law was imperfect because nobody could keep it perfectly.
Right.
And it says in 3:23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. His point in saying that about Abraham and repeating what was said in Genesis was that it was less about the works and more about the belief. That the works came after, but they came because of the belief. And that without the belief, the faith, the works were of no effect. That it was impossible to be that perfect man of God, and yet you could still be that man of God because of faith, which was counted as righteousness.
It's what gives us hope. When you look at Abraham, you look at David, you look at Paul, none of them were perfect. They made mistakes. So we know, okay, we make mistakes, but we can still be righteous.
But as long as we have that belief and that we are trying to do the right thing. And that goes into the next little section I had here. I said, well, let's back up just a minute. When he placed his trust in God when he was told to leave his land, but he did not wholly commit to the divine protection that would be with him on his journey.
He runs to Egypt. We don't see that that's necessarily God's sanction.
Right. But in the end, God bails them out. Bails them out twice. What's difficult about this section we're going through is it's not just one section that we can look at and read, because there's different stories interspersed along the way. So, for instance, chapter 14 deals with Abram saving Lot's bacon. But before we go on, yes.
The statement that you brought up as far as the Ecclesiasticus, that's really a mistake, because Abraham didn't live under the Old Testament law as far as the Mosaic law. And even as you look at what Jeremy brought up in Romans 3 and 4, his big point is these people who are striving to keep the law, well, Abraham lived before it. He was righteous without that law. And so I think we have to keep that in mind as far as the time periods go, as far as what's being said and who's being told to do what.
That is correct. So was he keeping God's law? Even though there wasn't a written law, was he? Pardon?
He would have been keeping the patriarchal law.
Keeping the patriarch, right. Okay. Yes, sir.
And when you talk about did Abraham place all his faith in God and his protection, a lot of times in my life, especially lately, when I've been looking for employment, it's been very trying. And I keep telling me, every once in a while, I'll tell myself, oh, ye of little faith. Just have faith. It's hard. It's hard for us humans to do that.
It is extremely difficult, and one of the areas that I think is most difficult is when we're in need and we pray to God to take care of something. What do we do after that?
We're trying to fix it ourselves.
We either try to fix it ourselves, or we keep thinking about it, or we keep dwelling on it, or we'll let a little time go by and we'll pray for it again. Well, there's nothing wrong with constant prayer. But if you believed that God was going to take care of it and you prayed to Him to take care of it, you should let it go. It's His now, not my problem anymore. But we can't do that. We have a very difficult time doing that. And like I said, he didn't learn from his first time with his wife and bad folks. He did it again in chapter 20. But let's start with chapter 21. I'm sorry. Let's go back. We're going to start with chapter 15. In chapter 15, verse 1 says, "After these things the word of the Lord came to Abraham in a vision, saying, Fear not, Abraham, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. And Abram said, Lord God, what wilt thou give me, seeing I go childless?" Why did he ask that question? It had already been promised in Genesis 12 and verse 2 that he would be made a great nation. Let's look at that, 12 and 2. In chapter 12 and verse 2 it says, "And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing." And then in chapter 13 and verse 16, "And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered." So here, when we get to chapter 15, he had been promised that there'd be made a great nation and that there'd be many seed. So when God starts to make this covenant with him again, then he asked, "What wilt thou give me, seeing that I go childless?" I think that was a fair question. And then when we get down to verse 6, and it says of chapter 15, "He believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness." Again, that's what we read in Romans, but here Abraham's belief in God, it was counted righteous, even though he had a question for God. It wasn't exactly, "What are you going to give me?" I don't think was the question. I more or less think the question was, how's all this going to come about?
At that point in time, it looked impossible.
Because for Abraham, it looked impossible. I have a wife of many years, but I have no children. So how is all of this going to take place?
Some of this, Larry, we have to, I guess, looking at verse 6, we have to read between the lines and insert James chapter 2, where his belief was acted upon by his obedience.
Right. And then when we get down to verse 18 of chapter 15, again it says, "In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates." So here, God is going to give him all this stuff. Abraham believes in God. And now we're going to see how things start to move around. Chapter 16. "Now Sarah, Abram's wife, bare him no children. And she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar." Now, how old is Sarah at this time? I'm sorry?
How old is he?
How old is Sarah at this time?
Mid-80s?
Not quite yet, but about 65, because we find out that when Abram went into Egypt and all this started, he was 75, so she would have been 65, and then all of this rolls around. But anyway, most women getting up of that age are past their childbearing age. But so
You wonder if it's important as the scriptures go through this, because chapter 15 talks about Eliezer. He says he's of Damascus. Now we have Hagar. She's mentioned about being Egyptian. Both of those are outside the realm of this promise.
right.
So he's making a distinction about where this seed's going to come from.
It clarifies that a little bit later, but right here, here's where Sarah messes up. Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband, Abram, to be his wife. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress despised her in her eyes. This is where you had said that Abraham will try to take care of things himself instead of leaving it to God. And Sarah did the same thing. Now, what was Sarah's motivation behind this? Because apparently, if you look at the culture of the time, the reason that men had multiple wives, even though it wasn't God approved or sanctioned, but allowed, their main motive for doing this was either to have a male heir or to have an abundance of children. It doesn't appear as though Abraham is interested in this. It is Sarah that wants a child. Why, and what is her motivation?
Well, judging by Jacob's wife, because it wasn't just a second wife, it was the wife's servant, the children would be viewed as hers culturally.
Right. But why did she want a child?
Because she had no social standing without children.
Right. That's where we get to it, because Sarah, being barren, was not looked at as favorably as those women who had children. So she wanted a child, and as Alyssa says, in that culture, even if you go to the book of Ruth, you can see where if the handmaid, the second wife, had a child, it would be considered Sarah's child. But the difficulty is, let me read a couple more verses, and then I'm going to get into some tanglement here. And Sarah said unto Abram, My wrong be upon thee. I have given my maid into thy bosom. And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. The Lord judged between me and thee. But Abram said unto Sarah, Behold, thy maid is in thy hand. Do to her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarah dealt harshly or hardly with her, she fled from her face. Now, again, Alyssa had mentioned second wife. A concubine or a second wife did not have the same standing as the primary or the first wife. Now, that handmaid, Hagar, was Sarah's property. At the point where she says, Go into my husband and become his wife, she is no longer Sarah's property. She is under the protection of Abram. Abram, as the man, is responsible for the protection of the second wife, or concubine, if you want to call them that. But then when it flips around that Sarah is not happy with what's going on, Abraham says, take her back. She's yours. Do with her as you please. That was not right. He shouldn't have done that. Why did he do it, Brother Clunch?
We talked about the blame with Adam and Eve. Do you suppose Sarah's trying to pass the blame on to Abraham?
Absolutely.
It's not my fault that I can't conceive, it's your fault. So here's proof, if you take this other woman, she doesn't have a conception, but she does, and then that's when Sarah gets all upset about it, when the conception takes place.
Yeah, you loved her more than you did me, or you, whatever the reason. But yes, she tried to shift the blame, so Abraham just gives her back and says, do with her, do whatever you want to. And then she treated her harshly, and she left. So what effect does that have? If we're looking at the fateful choices have big effects, unfaithful choices have big effects, what does this little section right here with this one handmaid being given as a second wife, what effect does that have? Descendants are still fighting today. Well, this is a good time to talk about that. If you trace everything back, there are 3 major religions in the world today. A whole mess of sub-religions, but there's 3 main religions in the world today. Can you name them? Islam, Christianity, Judaism. Where do all 3 of those trace back to? Abraham. So, big consequences. Now, after she left, an angel found her and sent her back, saying that she was going to have a child. And in verse 11 of chapter 16, the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and shall bear a son, and shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. And in verse 15, Hagar bare Abram a son, and Abram called his son's name, which Hagar bare, Ishmael. And Abram was 86 years old. So he was 86 at this time, which would have made Sarah 76. Then we skip a few years. When Abram was 90 years old and 9, the Lord appeared to him again, walked with him, told him a few things. Then when we get down to verse 15 of chapter 17, and God said unto Abraham, As for Sarah thy wife, thou shalt not call her name Sarah, but Sarah call her name shall be, and I will bless her and give thee a son also of her. Yea, I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations, kings of people shall be of her. Then Abraham fell upon his face and laughed, and said in his heart, Shall a child be born unto him that is 100 years old? And shall Sarah, that is 90 years old, bear? And Abraham said unto God, Oh, that Ishmael might live before thee. We've gone a few years here. Apparently, if we read between the lines, Hagar and Ishmael are still living in the same unit with Abraham and Sarah. And this one verse here would tell you that Abraham is very concerned about his firstborn child, Ishmael, because he said unto God, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before thee." Why would he make that phrase when God in the previous verse had said that Sarah, his primary wife, was going to have a child? What was the custom of the day? Firstborn male gets the most, and then everything else is divided up along the way. And Abraham apparently had some concerns here that things were not going to go well for Ishmael. Verse 20, "And as for Ishmael, I have heard thee," the Lord speaking. "Behold, I have blessed him and make him fruitful and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at this set time in the next year." So God is telling him right off the bat that don't worry about Ishmael. He's going to be a great nation. He's going to be a wild man. Other things are said about him. But he's going to have 12 boys. They're going to turn out to be princes and going to be a great nation. As we sit here today and look at the world, did that event take place? Yeah. And as Brother Day said, the sides are still fighting. Yes, sir.
I guess we ought to learn the lesson as far as verses 18 to 20. But be careful what you pray for.
Better be careful what you pray for. Verse 21, "But my covenant he established with Sarah." And Sarah verse 23, "And Abraham took Ishmael his son, and all that were born in his house, and all that were bought with his money, every male among the men of Abraham's house, circumcised him, as the covenant had said. And Abram was 99 when that happened." Verse 26, "And the selfsame day was Abraham circumcised, and Ishmael his son, and all the men of the house." Now, if we skip over to, let me make sure what verse I'm going to. Chapter 21. In chapter 21, the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bare Abraham a son in his old age at a set time of which God had spoken to him. Now, if we drop down to verse 8, "The child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast the same day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abraham, mocking. Wherefore she said unto Abraham, Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac." I'm going to pause there. Reading between the lines, it looks like Abraham and Ishmael and Hagar got along fine. And Abraham cared a lot about Ishmael. Sarah, through jealousy though, appeared not to be that way. She didn't want him around. So Abraham acquiesces and is going to send him away. But look at what verse 11 said, and you'll see why I'm saying some of the things I did. "And the thing was very grievous in Abraham's sight because of his son." A few verses earlier, he had asked God to remember, look at, take care of Ishmael. He was concerned about him. Here, he is grieved because Sarah wants him gone, wants him out of the nowhere around, doesn't want him to have any inheritance. And as I said, by patriarchal law, the way things worked then, the male firstborn got twice the share of everybody else. Everything else was, he got half of it, and everything else was divided among the rest of them. So here, when he's sent away, he's not going to get that, but God's going to take care of him. And God said unto Abraham, let it not be grievous in thy sight because of the lad and because of thy bondwoman, and all that Sarah hath said unto thee, hearken unto her voice. For in Isaac shall be thy seed, for in Isaac shall thy seed be called. And also of the son of the bondwoman will I make a nation, because he is thy seed. So again, Abraham is trying to do the right thing here. Sarah's the one that's not totally in agreement with it and wants things done a different way. And as we know from history and the Bible, they send him away, and he gets married in Egypt and has 12 sons, and a great nation is made of him. There's one verse I want to go to make sure before we go back to anything else. If we'll jump over to chapter 25. Before we start looking at chapter 25, in the interim, Sarah dies, and Sarah's buried. Then when we get to chapter 25, Abraham marries again. Now remember, he had sent the bondwoman Hagar away. So he marries another woman, Keturah, and has 6 sons. Then when we look down in verse 5, Abraham gave, or verse 4, Abraham gave something to his children by Keturah, but Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac, but unto the sons of the concubines which Abram had, Keturah, he gave a few gifts. Then in verse 7, and these are the days of the years of Abraham's life which he lived, 160 years. So how long did he live? 175. Then Abraham gave up the ghost and died in a good old age, an old man, full of years, and he was gathered to his people. Now the verse I wanted to focus on was this last verse. And his sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him in the cave of Machpelah in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, which is before Mamre. Remember I said that Sarah had died and was buried, and there's no mention of Ishmael coming back to her funeral. Abraham had 6 sons by Keturah, but he had sent all of those away so that they wouldn't be a squabble over anything left. He gave everything to Isaac. Ishmael didn't get anything that way except God had provided for him. But why would Ishmael come back and join Isaac in burying Abraham? Still his son, regardless of what happened. He basically required to do so, but why did the other 6 not? He had sent them away.
Kind of reading between the lines, but it's been almost 40 years since Sarah's death, and we're not told how far says a lot about Ishmael and a lot about Hagar, I think, that we see Ishmael here at Abraham's burial.
Well, and again, reading between the lines, I read just a little bit more into it. I'm going just a little bit past where you're going. Is that because of the references to that Abraham was grieved over certain things that happened. Abraham prayed to God for him to take care of Ishmael, that Ishmael and Abraham had a good relationship. And Ishmael, even when he was 13 years old and sent away, he understood the whys, that it wasn't Abraham that was sending him away, it was Sarah that was the driving force. So I believe, reading between the lines, that Abraham was a good father to Ishmael as long as he could be, and that possibly there was some contact, or we know he went to Egypt and got wives and all, but still, for him to come back to the funeral, I think it was not only an obligation he had because he was the father, but also because he respected Abraham. Now that might be reading a little bit too much into it. Brother Clarence, what you say on it?
I might look at the negative side of it. Maybe Ishmael showed up because he was willing to say, well, what am I going to get out of this now that he's dead?
Okay. That is a possibility also.
This goes to show that no matter how good a life you live, that one poor choice by Abraham, there were consequences all throughout the rest of his family's life. And then even beyond that, we see first off with Israel coming back into Canaan and being rebuffed, and then, like you said, all the way until today in the conflicts that exist. All of that was because of Abraham making that one choice, even though so much of the other things that we see in Abraham's life were the right choice.
Which one choice you talking about?
Listening and taking Hagar and making that mistake, trying to do God's plan for him.
Right. There's so many lessons that we could learn from this. If you look around today, and I know I kind of beat up on this subject and I harp on it a lot, but if you look at all the children that are born out of wedlock, how many of the fathers hang around to do the right thing versus how many of them don't want to have anything to do with them? Don't even want to pay child support. That's why if you follow God's plan is to first marry, then have children, man and woman in the household to raise the child. If you follow that plan, that is a good choice, and everything is going to work out a whole lot better than the other choices. He's got up, he's counting. We got 3 or 4 minutes left. Questions, comments?
Larry, I think that goes to show too that we can have great hope because in spite of poor choices and the consequences that come with them, God can make great things out of them.
Absolutely. Questions, comments?
Larry, one thing that keeps jumping out at me is chapter 21, verse 2, it says, "For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him." So apparently there was some discussion of when this would happen, so Abraham knew that there was a set time, but yet he still went along with his plan that Sarah had. It seems odd to me.
I might have to go back and look at that again, because when I read through that, I think the set time means that the normal birth cycle is about to happen.
Well, it says of which God had spoken to him, so he wouldn't have had to be told that set
Right.
cycle. That would be pretty well established by then.
Yeah. God had spoken to him that there would be the seed and all. And, well, like I said, I need to look at that some more. You may be right. I need to chew on that one a little bit more. Anything else? Yes, sir.
I think you can still see, even though there were bad choices and things, God had a plan that he was putting into effect. Regardless of however many bad decisions they may have made, God still had something better that was expected to come out of this.
Absolutely. They made a bad decision in Egypt when he told her to say that she was a sister. God stepped in. Then with Abimelech, God stepped in to take care of the bad choices. But if we can just sit back and look at it on the whole, we've already said that Abraham was not a perfect person. None of us are perfect. But he was counted righteous because of his belief. And there's more to belief than just a thought process. If you believe something, what are you supposed to do? Your actions are supposed to mirror your belief, isn't it? I can say that I believe Bobby is rides a Harley. But if I don't go out and see that Harley, he might be riding a, what's that, Suzuki or something else.
Or I just like to shop at Harley shop.
Or you just like to shop at a Harley shop. So your actions have to go along with your belief. So, anything else? I can say I know one thing for sure. I know that Donnie Crosby's a good fisherman. I've witnessed it. So, anything else? Brother Golden?
James 2:21 says that Abraham was also counted righteous.
Yeah.
He offered Isaac sacrifice. So we got to combine obedience with it.
Yeah, you got that in Romans we read, in Genesis, yeah. It was counted for righteous.
Yeah, Romans 16:26 also
Right,
says faith requires obedience.
correct. Anything? We're going to stop a minute early then. He'll be ringing the bell in just a minute or so, but thank y'all so much.